Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something pretty big,
Hmm.
uh, potentially a real tech revolution brewing in Europe.
hmm
The idea is to build a whole new social media scene,
Hmm.
one that could actually challenge the big U.S. tech companies.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. We've got some material here outlining this Europe's tech revolution, and there's also this call from academics.
Right, they're basically saying Europe needs its own local interconnected platforms.
And they specifically mention countering what they call new U.S. technopolitics. It's quite pointed.
It is, and it all seems tied into the EU getting tougher with regulations like the DSA and DMA, right?
Exactly. You've got Europe tightening the reins, pushing for transparency, accountability.
Well, maybe Silicon Valley is seen as heading, a bit more libertarian, especially with things like, the ongoing trade disputes in the background.
It definitely sets up an interesting dynamic, a real potential shift in digital power.
Okay, so our mission today is to unpack this whole thing for you. We want to get into the why behind it, what these new platforms might actually be like, and, crucially, how they could possibly build them.
Trying to give you that deep understanding, but, without drowning in jargon.
Precisely. So, let's start with the why. What's really driving this push?
Well, a big part of it, as you mentioned, is the EU's determination. The DSA and DMA aren't just suggestions. They're serious laws aimed at making tech companies more transparent and accountable.
And curbing some of the harms we see, like disinformation or those manipulative algorithms.
Exactly that. There's a clear intention to tackle those societal downsides, maybe differently than how some of the big U.S. players have approached it.
And that academic call, countering new U.S. technopolitics, what does that really mean in practice?
I think it points to a feeling that the dominant U.S. tech model, with its specific blend of corporate power and maybe a lighter regulatory touch on some issues, well, that it's not the only way.
So Europe wants to carve its own path. Digital sovereignty.
That seems to be a core theme, yeah. Asserting control over its own digital future, independent of that Silicon Valley framework.
Makes sense. But beyond the politics and principles, what are the sort of concrete benefits they're hoping for? What's the practical upside for Europe?
Oh, economically, the potential is huge. Think about it. Locally owned platforms keeping revenue in Europe, creating tech jobs here.
Instead of the talent and money flowing out.
Right, maybe even reversing some of that brain drain. You see projections, though you always take those with a grain of salt, but suggesting, billions in potential revenue, thousands of jobs.
Okay, that's a strong economic driver.
Yeah.
What about the social side? How does this help the average person, the user?
The idea is a healthier information space, platforms operating under strict EU rules. Well, the hope is it'll be easier to track and reduce things like hate speech or fake news spreading.
A bit more oversight from the start.
Kind of like building the town square with clearer rules and maybe better lighting, More transparency, more accountability baked in.
And the sources talk about more freedom for users, too, moving away from siloed platforms. What does that mean for me if I'm using one?
That's the interoperability piece. Imagine sending a message from one European social app to a friend on a different one, seamlessly.
Oh, okay. Like email almost.
A bit like that, yeah. And data portability, being able to easily pack up your contacts, your posts, and move to another service if you want.
So breaking down those walls between apps.
Exactly. Giving you, the user, more control, more freedom. And underpinning all that is stronger data protection, thanks to GDPR, more say over your own information.
Okay, the why is pretty compelling. Let's shift to the what. What are the key features, the defining traits of these platforms they envision?
Well, as we just touched on, interoperability and data portability are absolutely central. They're designed to work together.
And built from the ground up with EU rules in mind.
Yes. Compliance with GDPR, DSA, DMA wouldn't be an afterthought. It would be foundational. The whole design philosophy leans towards user choice, transparency about how things work, and clear accountability.
Who builds them, though? Is this like government projects or...
It seems like a mix is envisioned.
Yeah.
Definitely encouraging local entrepreneurs, European startups to jump in.
Okay.
But also the possibility of public-private partnerships is mentioned. Maybe government backing to help get things off the ground, combined with private sector know-how.
So fostering a whole ecosystem, not just one giant state-run thing.
That seems to be the goal, yeah. A diverse, competitive European landscape.
All right, why and what covered. Now, the really tricky part, the how. What needs to be in place for this to actually happen? What are the prerequisites?
This is where the existing EU rulebook really comes into play. First off, GDPR compliance is non-negotiable.
Right, the data protection law.
Absolutely. Any platform handling user data in the EU has to nail this, getting clear consent, managing data responsibly, giving users control.
And the penalties for getting it wrong are serious.
Extremely serious. We've seen massive fines, hundreds of millions, even billions potentially. It forces companies to take it seriously. Think about that Amazon fine, $746 million. That gets attention.
No kidding. Okay, so GDPR is baseline. What about the Digital Services Act, the DSA? How does that fit?
The DSA is broader. It's about making the entire online environment safer.
How so?
It sets rules for how platforms handle illegal content, protect user rights, how transparent they need to be about ads, about content moderation decisions. It applies to pretty much any online service operating in the EU.
So it levels the playing field a bit, maybe? Everyone has to follow these rules?
Yeah, part of the idea, yeah. Create a baseline of responsibility.
The sources also flag the role of a DPO data protection officer. Sounds important.
It is, especially for platforms handling lots of data. Under GDPR, many need to appoint a DPO. This person is internally responsible for overseeing data protection, managing consent, dealing with user requests. Basically, the go-to expert for GDPR compliance within the company.
Got it. So GDPR, DSA, maybe a DPO. What else is essential for this? How? Interoperability seems key to the whole vision.
Definitely. And the EU is pushing this hard, particularly through the Digital Markets Act, the DMA.
How does the DMA help interoperability?
Well, the DMA targets the really big gatekeeper platforms, the dominant ones. It imposes rules on them specifically designed to prevent them from unfairly blocking competitors or locking users in.
So it tries to force the big guys to play nicer, allowing smaller, newer platforms a chance to connect.
In essence, yes. It encourages features that let users switch services easily, take their data with them. It's all about boosting competition and user choice, breaking down those silos we talked about.
Makes sense. And on these new platforms themselves, what about keeping things safe, content moderation?
Absolutely critical. They'll need crystal clear terms of service, easy ways for users to report illegal or harmful stuff, and transparent processes for deciding what gets taken down.
And protecting kids online, presumably.
Yes. Age-appropriate measures and protections for minors are a huge part of the DSA and a basic expectation. It has to be a priority.
Okay. One last prerequisite mentioned is transparency and accountability. What does that actually mean for a social media site?
It means being open about how things work. Like, how does the algorithm decide what you see in your feed? How is your data actually being used?
So lifting the lid on the black box a bit.
Exactly. Providing clear, understandable information, and ultimately being answerable for the platform's impact and decisions. It's all about building trust with users.
Right. That trust is crucial. So that covers the how. But let's face it, the competition is, well, immense.
Right.
Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, X. They're giants. How can any new European platform realistically compete?
It's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, the incumbents have enormous advantages, existing user bases, network effects, vast amounts of data, super sophisticated algorithms.
It seems almost impossible to break in.
It's incredibly challenging, but we are seeing European startups emerge. Often they focus on specific niches or maybe emphasize local culture or really make privacy and data protection their core selling point.
So finding cracks where the giants might be weaker.
Potentially. And the EU itself seems keen to support these homegrown efforts, though the details on how much support is still developing.
And you mentioned regulation. Could that actually be an advantage for European platforms?
It could be, surprisingly. Being GDPR compliant from day one could appeal to users worried about privacy.
Using it as a selling point, basically.
Exactly. And the DSA, by applying to everyone, might slightly level the playing field, making it harder for the very biggest players to just dominate through sheer scale without meeting those baseline responsibilities.
Okay, so regulation might help. What about features? How can they innovate to stand out?
Differentiation is key. Maybe offering unique tools tailored to European languages or cultural interests. Different approaches to community building or content moderation. And that interoperability, we keep mentioning that itself, is a major differentiator from the closed ecosystems we have now.
Building that user base, though, getting people to actually switch or sign up, that seems like the biggest mountain to climb.
It is. Building trust is paramount. Being radically transparent about data, about algorithms, fostering genuine communities where people feel valued, not just farmed for engagement data.
Creating a different feel.
Yeah, maybe a less transactional experience. Plus, partnerships could be vital.
What kind of partnerships?
Collaborating with local content creators, European influencers, maybe businesses, integrating with local payment systems or e-commerce could make platforms more useful in people's daily lives.
Okay, so there are strategies. Let's get more specific. How do you actually attract European users? What hooks them?
The sources suggest segmenting the audience, like for younger people, focus on interactive content, trending topics. For professionals, maybe stronger networking tools. For local communities, things like event calendars, local news feeds. You could even appeal to cultural interests or people interested in sustainability or social issues.
Tailoring the appeal, not just a one-size-fits-all approach. What about the content on the platform?
A mix is needed. User-generated stuff is essential, of course.
Right.
But also actively encouraging localized content, regional languages, specific cultural topics, maybe partnerships with universities for educational content, or focusing on entertainment like streaming or gaming. Highlighting those European values or causes could also resonate.
And the platform features themselves. Anything specific Europeans might particularly want?
Well, privacy and security are big ones, as we've said. Interoperability is a potential game changer. Good multilingual support is a must in Europe.
Absolutely.
And accessibility meeting European standards for users with disabilities. Plus, maybe more community-driven moderation tools could be appealing.
How do they market this? How do they even get noticed across such a diverse continent?
Working with European influencers and creators seems smart, maybe sponsoring or participating in local events, running targeted campaigns in different countries. And crucially, listening to users from the start, asking for feedback and actually acting on it builds loyalty.
It sounds like a massive undertaking. What are the biggest roadblocks still? What's the outlook?
Sources are clear. This needs serious money. Significant investment. And it needs coordination, governments, entrepreneurs, regulators, all pulling in roughly the same direction.
Not easy.
Not easy at all. It requires real strategic planning. Things like government grants or public-private partnerships might be needed to kickstart things. The stakes are definitely high. Failure is very possible.
But the potential rewards are also significant if they pull it off.
Immense. The documents talk about Europe being on the cusp of a tech governance revolution. That's strong language.
It really is.
Yeah.
It frames it as more than just building apps. It's about reshaping how this part of the digital world operates.
Exactly. The ultimate vision seems to be a social media landscape where user choice, transparency, and accountability are the norm, not the exception, maybe even setting an example globally.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up. So we've seen Europe's really ambitious plan here, build a new social media ecosystem. It's driven by regulations like DSA-DAMA, a desire for more digital independence, and a focus on benefits for users like interoperability and data control.
Right. And we've unpacked the need for solid GDPR and DSA compliance, interoperability built in, robust moderation, transparency.
And the strategies for actually competing, finding niches, leveraging regulation, innovating, building trust, using partnerships, and tailoring content and marketing for European audiences.
It covers a lot of ground, highlighting both the scale of the challenge and the potential transformation.
It really does. And thinking about all this, the complexity, the investment needed, but also the potential upside, it leaves you with a big question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For these European platforms to genuinely succeed, to really challenge the status quo, what needs to change in us, the users? Do our expectations, our online habits, need a fundamental shift?
That's a fascinating point. Are users willing to prioritize privacy over network size or interoperability over familiar features?
Exactly. And what role do individual users actually play in making this tech revolution happen or not? It's definitely something to mull over. Thanks for exploring this deep dive with us today.